Okay, we are going to talk a little bit more about how the muscles and the motor unit essentially works. Okay, so muscle contractions can be observed by removing a single skeletal muscle fiber, right? And we can stimulate it with an electrical probe, and we can actually see that muscle tighten up, all right? So they've done this on like cadavers and stuff, and they've seen how the muscle will actually engage based on an electrical signal. So we can do that with electricity. In your body, that electricity, that electrical signal is created by electrolytes, all right, and differentiation in electrolytes in the axon terminals of the motor neurons. All right, and we'll talk more about that when we get into the nervous system. All right, but for now, we're going to focus a little bit more on that axon terminal and the specific fibers. All right. So, in order for the stimulus to make the muscle actually move, it has to hit a threshold, right? So it's called the threshold stimulus. There's a minimum strength of stimulation that has to happen. When that minimum strength has to happen, what happens is what's called an action potential. Action potential generates a response. All right. So there has to be a certain amount of electricity or neurotransmitter that's released in order for the muscle to actually engage, in order for the calcium ions, for there to be enough calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum to open up the cross bridges from the troponin and tropomyosin, right? One action potential from a motor neuron releases enough acetylcholine to produce threshold stimulus in muscle fiber, causing a muscle impulse. The variation is like in how much your muscle is contracted has to do with the specific types of fibers and the specific type of axon that's being, or motor neuron that's being stimulated. All right, so this is like an actual muscle contraction or a twitch. So a twitch is when we look at the fiber level, that's the action potential and response of the muscles. The muscle is engaged is the twitch. All right, so there's 3 parts to it. There's a latent period. All right, so that's when the acetylcholine is being released here. The calcium ions are going to be released. Troponin and tropomyosin are going to move. All right, we have the period of contraction, right? And then the period of your relaxation. So this is when the myosin heads are going to attach to the actin, and then they're going to release, and the calcium is going to go back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum in the period of relaxation. All right. So length tension relationship. The length of the muscle fiber before it's actually stimulated determines how much it can be stimulated. So normally, we'll say this graph shows you kind of like this is the optimal length. This is how far in, and it's kind of like how close in are the actin to the M zone. All right, how much space do you have for these actin to kind of contract and pull in towards the center for the full contraction? So a normal muscle that's relaxed should look something like this in the fibers, right? And this should be the resting length of the muscle fiber, right? This should give enough room so that the muscle's contracted. There is going to be a pull, so the myosin heads attached to the actin, pull in the actin, and the actin shortens, the muscle shortens, right? So when we talk about underactive and overactive muscles in the body, such as when we talk about posture, so an example of poor posture, we said, is protracting your neck and reaching your head forward, which means that now the like the levator scapulae or some of the other neck muscles are going to be overstretched. So their muscle fibers are going to look like this. All right. And because they're overstretched, a lot of times the myosin heads can't reach the actin binding sites. So they're having a hard time contracting and controlling these muscles because they're so far overstretched. At the same token, in this same protraction, the same reach forward, the muscles in the front of the neck are more tightly held together, all right? They're overly shortened muscles, so they're overused muscles in this case, and there's nowhere for them to contract to. All right, because they're already too tight. All right, so both overly shortened and overly stretched muscles have a hard time functioning correctly, and a lot of times they get muscle cramps or strains, or sprains, even if like the attachment sites start to get irritated or inflamed because of being overstretched or overly shortened. Right. So summation is the process by which the force of an individual muscle fiber twitches combine. All right. So this is like you have multiple muscle fibers that are activated by one motor neuron, right? You can activate multiple motor neurons to activate more muscle fibers to create more of a reaction, right? This produces more sustained reactions. So if there's more acetylcholine released by more neurotransmitters, we get what's called a tetanic contraction, right? And this kind of looks like the word tetanus. They come from the same place because you're talking about the engagement of the muscles, and tetanus is like infection that causes muscles to twitch, right? All right, so a tetanic contraction is just like a high rate of muscle contractions, all right? So this is like a normal thing. If you're trying to use your muscles a lot, you're trying to engage them at a fast rate, all right? Then you're going to do high rate tetanic contractions. Okay. And these individual graphs kind of show like different action potentials. This would be like a tetanic high rate action potential. So this is like a whole bunch of acetylcholine being released there, a whole bunch of muscle fibers being engaged. All right. Whereas this would be like engagement, release, engagement, release, engagement, release. All right. Increasing engagement. So this is kind of like you're pulling something heavy and you don't realize how heavy it is. You're going to recruit more and more and more and more muscles. And then maybe you move it to wherever you want to. And then this is the release here. All right. So the motor unit that we've talked about before consists of the motor neuron and the muscle fibers that it attaches to. So there's different types of motor units that you can have. So this is a motor neuron this is just unit 1, and you can see how it attaches to 3 fibers, right? Whereas motor neuron for motor unit 2 only has 2 fibers that it's attached to, right? And the more branches that you have out, the greater control and the greater the contraction. So if we just recruit this motor neuron right here, then it's only going to activate a couple of muscle fibers. Okay, so a whole muscle consists of many motor units, right? So we have like tons of these. We're not even looking at all of like the dense irregular connective tissue that's between these muscle fibers. All right, coarse movements or like big movements like walking are produced by large numbers of fibers in a motor unit. Precise movements, so like drawing a picture or writing neatly, are produced with fewer muscle fibers in a motor unit. So this would be like if you were writing something, we're probably talking about motor neuron for unit 2, where it's just like a couple of fibers that are going to be created or used to write something really very specific. All right. So that's those like fine controls. And as an infant, you actually get control of the larger units before you get control over the smaller units, right? So recruitment, the increase in number of motor units activated to produce more force. So as you're trying to create more force within a muscle, you're going to recruit more and more of those fibers. Certain motor units are activated first and others activate only when the intensity of the stimulus increases. All right. So your initial response to something isn't to activate all of the muscles. It's once more force is required from the nervous system. All right, as the intensity of the stimulation increases, recruitment of more motor units continues until all of the motor units are activated, all right, depending on how much force you need, of course, from a muscle. All right. So we can talk about how there's smaller and larger motor units. So what's going to happen first is that smaller units are going to be activated first, right? So first we're going to make smaller movements, okay? And then the larger motor units are going to be activated if they're needed, right? So this smaller units are going to create more smooth control, and then the large units working with them is going to create the force to that control. All right, the summation of the recruitment can produce sustained contractions of increasing strength. All right, muscle tone or tonus is the continuous state of partial contraction in a resting muscle. So when you see somebody that you see like tone to their muscle, like you can see muscle shape under their skin, right? That means that their muscles have a continuous state of like being a little bit shortened, a little bit toned as a result of that. And some of that is part of the fascia tissue that's around the muscle being shortened and holding the muscle in place. And some of it is that the actual muscle fibers are tight within each other. Right? We have different levels of contraction or different types of contractions. Okay, so an isotonic contraction is when muscles contract and it changes the length, right? So we can lengthen or we can shorten to create an isotonic contraction, all right? So when we're shortening, and this is usually what we think of when we're contracting the muscle, is this is the example with the bicep curl, is you're bringing the insertion point towards the origin. So that muscle has the insertion point that it attaches to, and it's moving towards the origin. It's going to pull the radius and ulna in. Okay, so that's a concentric type of contraction, right? We can also have a contraction when you're bringing the dumbbell back down towards the ground. Those muscles are still contracting. Those are eccentric. Those are lengthening contractions, right? And then we have isometric muscle contractions where, like, if you're just like squeezing something and engaging a muscle in place, or if you're pulling something without it moving. So they're showing it like he's pulling on this bar, but he's not actually moving his arm at all. All right, he's just engaging the muscle. That's isometric. All right, so isotonic is broken down into two types. Isometric, you're not actually moving the arm at all. You're just engaging the muscle. Okay. So then we talk about slow twitch and fast twitch muscle fibers. All right. So slow twitch muscle fibers we talked about before. These are ones that are going to be more aerobic. So they're always oxidative. They last way longer. So they're resistant to fatigue. These are darker muscle fibers. And they have more abundant myoglobin. Myoglobin is one of the proteins that helps hold on to oxygen in the blood. So really this just means that there's more oxygen going into these muscles. All right, so they have the good blood supply. They have a lot of mitochondria, so they're doing aerobic respiration. They're producing tons of ATP. Lots of ATP energy is being used in these slow muscle activities. They have slow ATPase activity, so they're slow to use up their ATP, and they're slower to contract, okay? So think of the marathon runner here. We have two types of fast twitch muscle. So we have fast twitch fatigue resistant muscle fibers, which is kind of like an in-between between these two. All right, these are intermediate twitch muscle fibers. So they have some oxidative capacity. They do some aerobic, some anaerobic, all right? And they're kind of in between, using more myoglobin. So same thing, that's the protein in the blood that's bringing more oxygen around. Right. And there's going to be more white fibers. So the fibers actually look more white because of the sarcoplasmic reticulum being a little bit more active. They're more resistant to fatigue than the other fast twitch type. And they have more rapid ATPase activity. So they're using up ATP a little bit faster than our slow twitch muscles. All right. And then the other extreme is fast twitch glycolytic fibers. All right. So this is type 2B. All right. This is anaerobic respiration. So this is going to be a lot of glycolysis, a lot of lactic acid accumulation. These muscles are going to fatigue and feel a strong burn within them when they're engaged. All right. They're going to have more white fibers, less myoglobin, so less oxygen is getting into them. All right, poor blood supply. All right, fewer mitochondria than the fast twitch because they're mostly, again, doing anaerobic. Right? They don't have as many mitochondria because those muscle fibers don't have enough time to wait for the mitochondria to break down the glucose. They just need energy fast now. So the glucose isn't even getting into the mitochondria. It's just going into the cytoplasm of the cell, splitting. Those 2 ATP that they get out of glycolysis is what those muscles are using. There's going to be more sarcoplasmic reticulum because these muscles are responding faster. All right, so they need the calcium to be ready. They need the water to be ready. All right, they're more susceptible to fatigue. All right, and they have fast ATPase activity. Right, so they're constantly needing more ATP to be released. Okay, so these muscles are actually going to consume a lot of energy in a resting state. Okay. Whereas when they're actually being used, they're not consuming as much energy as slow twitch muscles. Okay. Right. So this is like a breakdown of what I'm talking about with the slow twitch versus fast twitch. All right. So again, we've seen this before. Here's the bone that the muscle is attached to. All right. Here's the tendon attaching the muscle, and here's the fascia around the muscle. The skeleton. This is the actual muscle here. We have the epimysium, the paramysium, right, which is within the two. All right. Oops. And then we have the endomysium, which is between the smaller clusters of muscle fibers. And then if we look at these muscle fibers and the actual filaments, so here's like the actin and myosin and the sarcomeres in here, we can see where the fast twitch and the slow twitch is. So the lighter colored fibers that we're looking at, those are the fast twitch one. They have more sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then the slower twitch are the darker ones. So this muscle is showing you both of them. If we have athletes of a specific type of training, so this is like, these are going to be our short distance runs, long distance marathon runners, and these are kind of like intermediate runners. Okay, so their muscle fibers over here for the short distance are going to be really, really white. These are fast twitch muscles. Remember, they're slow to get oxygen supply, very anaerobic sprinters. Okay. And then our type 1 is going to be the ones who have way more oxygenation in their fibers. Right. So what are some clinical applications of this? Well, when a muscle is overused, we have hypertrophy. So hypertrophy is just like the engagement of the muscles and the use of the muscles to make them larger. So anybody who's working out and you can see the results of that in their muscle tone has hypertrophy. The opposite of that would be atrophy, and this would be loss of using the muscle, and those that muscle overall is going to decrease in size and strength if it's unused. All right, aerobic exercise stimulates slow twitch muscle fibers. In response to fibers increase their capillaries and their mitochondria. All right, force exercise stimulates many fast twitch, so this would be like more like running fast again. In response to fibers produce new actin and myosin filaments, right? And the new actin and myosin filaments makes the muscle again grow more. Okay. So the other types of muscles, and we'll just talk about this briefly. So smooth muscles, what is the difference? Okay, compared to skeletal muscles, smooth muscles are shorter. They have single centrally located nuclei. They're elongated with tapering ends, so they're kind of shaped more like this long oblong shape, more like a long oval stretch at the ends, right? Instead of being like a filament, which is like a straight tube. All right, the myofilaments randomly organized, so it doesn't have as much structure to it. It lacks striations to it, so you can't see the clear actin and myosin under microscopy for smooth muscles. They lack transverse tubules, right, which is part of the organization of the skeletal muscles. All right, and their sarcoplasmic reticulum is not very well developed. Smooth muscles don't have the same amount of strength as skeletal muscles. In fact, when you think about your digestive system, if you laid in bed to digest food, your digestive system is going to take way longer. Whereas if you moved around after eating food, and I don't mean right after, I mean like 30 minutes after, once the food is down into your intestines, which is all smooth muscle, that's going to help that digestive system way more. In fact, your digestive system kind of depends on that movement to make sure that things move around nicely. So even though you have smooth muscles in your small and large intestines, if you're sedentary and you're not moving around your skeletal muscles, then the digestive process is going to take a lot longer and not being as efficient. All right, we do have two types of smooth muscles. We'll have multi-unit smooth muscles. The cells are even less organized. They function as separate units. The fibers function independently. We see these in the iris of the eyes, the walls, the blood vessels, and they're stimulated by neurons and hormones. I mean, hormones is the more specific word that we're looking for here. So this means that it's all of these are automatic, so you don't control these, but the iris of the eye, which contracts and dilates the pupil. And then we have the visceral smooth muscle. So visceral meaning it pertains to the alimentary canal, the digestive tract. All right, these are single unit smooth muscles. The cells respond as a unit, so they're a little bit stronger in general. All right. the sheets of spindle-shaped fibers. The fibers are held together by gap junctions. All right, so they're a little bit more reinforced. They exhibit rhythmicity, so they work together. So that peristalsis action of like squeezing food down, right? And hollow organs, meaning like your small intestine, your large intestine, which moves food down your digestive tract. Okay. Ooh, and it's the more abundant type of smooth muscle. Right. So smooth muscle contractions is similar to a skeletal muscle contraction, right? Because they both have actin and myosin. They both use calcium ions and ATP, and both of them are triggered by membrane impulses, right? But here are some differences. So smooth muscles lack troponin, right? And they have something similar that prevents the cross-bridging, which is calmodulin. They have two neurotransmitters affect smooth muscles, acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is part of your fight or flight response in your body. Okay. Hormones can stimulate or inhibit smooth muscles. So this is like a hormone response. All right. Stretching can trigger smooth muscle contractions. All right, smooth muscles slower to contract and relax than skeletal muscles. Smooth muscle is more resistant to fatigue, and smooth muscles can change length without changing their tautness. All right. Okay, then we talk about the cardiac muscles a little bit, right? It's located only in the heart. You can see striations in the cardiac muscle. The muscle fibers are joined together by the intercalated discs, which are like these little discs between the cells that are reinforcing that connection, because this is the strongest muscle in the body. It doesn't stop. All right, the fibers branch and they contain single nuclei instead of the skeletal muscle multinucleated. All right, there's a network of fiber that contract as a unit. All right, they're self-exciting and rhythmic. All right, so these are automatic. You're not controlling how fast the rate of your heart is beating, and they have a longer refractory period than skeletal muscle. So that relaxation of the muscle takes a little bit longer before it can contract again. And no sustained or tetanic contractions. So they don't have stronger contractions and weaker contractions. All right. It just has a heart pulse of how long it can go. All right. So this is kind of like a nice chart that compares one to the other. Okay. So we can see how the dimension and the length is different, whereas the cardiac muscle are some of the longer fibers. Smooth is kind of in the middle, and skeletal fibers are pretty short. Okay. Okay, and we can go down this chart and kind of see where our similarities and differences. This is a great chart to have in your notes, and we're going to stop right